one of the insurance companies that had been giving me just issue after issue and forcing me to call and spend hours on the phone arguing about why they should pay for the service. In theory, what they're supposed to do for their customer who gives them money. And I finally said, I'm not dealing with you anymore. And I decredentialed, and that freed up several hours a week of my time.
This is Herd Business School, where we sit down with private practice owners and industry experts to learn about the business of therapy together. I'm your host, Michael Fulweiler. Therapists hold the key to deeply understanding human connection, a cornerstone of both healing and business success. But how do they translate this profound insight into a thriving practice? My guest on this episode of Herd Business School is someone who has mastered this balance beautifully, Dr. Amy Marschall. If you've come across her insightful writing or social media content, you'll recognize her as a powerhouse in the mental health field, especially within the rural and autistic community. Dr. Amy isn't just a psychologist. She's a writer, trainer, consultant, and entrepreneur widely recognized for her expertise on telehealth and psychological assessment. She's also hilarious, and we've become friends after meeting on Twitter. In our conversation, Dr. Amy emphasizes the importance of specializing in a niche and the powerful impact of creating valuable content for that niche. Dr. Amy also shares the nitty-gritty of running a private practice, including hiring administrative support and setting firm boundaries to prevent burnout. Dr. Amy's therapy business journey is a testament to innovation and dedication in mental health practice. Here's my conversation with Dr. Amy Marschall. Enjoy. Dr. Amy Marschall, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. It's good to be here.
Very excited to have you on. Mm-hmm. We are Twitter friends, which yes. I think I've heard you describe as pocket friends, which yes. I love.
I did not coin that, but I cannot for the life of me find who said it first, but it's the people who live in your pocket.
Right. Yeah. So nice to bring that relationship to somewhat real life, I suppose. I guess we're still sure. Virtual. You also do all of the things as an entrepreneur. You're a therapist, of course. You also do assessments. You are a writer, an author, a trainer, a consultant. So I want to dig into all of those things. You also have ADHD, which I want to talk about. I don't know if there's a relationship between those two things or not.
Yeah, the dopamine seeking is definitely there. It helps. I'm ADHD and autistic, so I get the hyper focus and the dopamine seeking. So I'm all over the place all the time.
Fascinating. I definitely want to talk about that from a business perspective. Before we get into all of that, after graduate school, you worked at a group practice. What was that experience like for you, kind of as a first step into the field?
So I don't think I could have done private practice immediately out of my postdoc, just because graduate school really doesn't touch the business side at all. So I had no idea we didn't learn about referral sources. We didn't learn about health insurance. We didn't learn about overhead, renting an office. Like they just kind of throw you out there. So it was, I think, good to have the experience where there were admin staff who they had me do it myself, but they had people like walking me through credentialing with insurance, tips on forming relationships with referral sources and things like that. Those things, honestly, once you're doing them, it was not as complicated as I made it out to be in my head before I started doing it myself. But it was good to have somebody to kind of have my back with that as we were doing it. Although, now everything, with so much being online, I think the overhead that I was concerned about with the private practice, it's a lot easier to do it for less because I sublet an office one day a week, so I can still do the things in person that need to be done in person. And I don't have to pay for an office the rest of the time. I have my home office right here, which is a write-off, which is nice. So I not only don't pay for it, but we save money because I have a home office. That this room in our house is my office and nothing else. So
if the IRS is listening.
Yes, if anybody is listening, I follow all the laws very carefully. I want to be very clear about that.
So what was that transition like for you going from the group practice to starting your own practice?
It was nice that I did kind of have the leeway to take as long as I needed to. So the biggest thing for me is that I'm a Medicare and Medicaid provider. Medicaid just South Dakota because other states won't let me take Medicaid. Even though I'm licensed there, they won't let me take it because I'm not a resident of that state and I don't have an office address in that state. So for potential clients listening, I get asked a lot, do you take Medicaid in these other states? I want to. I very badly want to. Call your reps and tell them to let me. But basically, it takes forever to get that moved over. So I was able to initiate the process, but keep my Medicaid clients at that practice and not move them until I had it turned on at the new practice. But it fell together really nicely because the office that I was initially subletting, their organization needed someone as a supervisor for Medicare in order for certain licensures to accept Medicare. And I was looking for a space and they said, hey, we'll trade you an office space for this supervision, which worked out really nicely until the law changed. Now I've actually got to pay for an office. So, but yeah, it kind of all fell together and was like really good timing and just seemed to work.
Did clients come with you from the group practice to your private practice? And that was okay with the group practice? And yeah.
So I like that we're looking at banning non-competes because on principle, I don't like those, but I don't understand how anyone could ethically try to enforce, like, you're not allowed to offer continuity of care. Like, how is that ethical? The group practice that I was at doesn't do non-compete. So that was not an issue for me because they understood that that's not ethical. So they never tried that in the first place. That's part of why I was working for them. I asked about that in the job interview. I think every single one of my clients did come with me when I shifted over. And, my referral sources, I just let them know, call me at this number instead of that number now. Here's my new email address. So it was pretty smooth in that sense.
How did you think about the financial side of your practice? Did you set up a bank account or did you already have one set up from, working at the group?
I had all my personal accounts. So when I registered it wasn't a PLLC, now it's an S Corp. But when I registered the PLLC, I just got a business checking account and a business credit card with my same bank and just everything, deposits into the business account and then I pay myself.
And were you doing your own bookkeeping in the beginning?
Oh, no, Herd does Herd does my bookkeeping.
Yeah. At what point did you partner with Herd?
Yeah, that was, I think, right away. Like when I started making money through the private practice, ADHD, I'm not going to do my own bookkeeping. I'm not going to do my own stuff. So I just want to be able to hand the pile to somebody and say, you figure this part out.
And you're based in South Dakota, which you mentioned. Yep. I'd love to dig into some of the unique challenges of building a practice in a more rural setting.
Honestly, I would, and granted, I am licensed in New York as well, so I've got a little bit of both going on, but I've found that the rural referral sources are really easy to pick up because there's fewer people, but there are no providers. South Dakota has the lowest number of licensed psychologists of any state in the country. And we're in the bottom 3 for number of mental health providers per capita. So we not only have fewer providers, but we have fewer providers relative to the total population than most places. So really, I don't have to market very much. Just people are like, oh my gosh, somebody,
Right. How do you build relationships with those referral sources?
When I first moved to South Dakota, I just made a list of GPs and pediatricians because I work with a lot of kids. And I just reached out and said, hey, I'm a licensed psychologist. Here's the insurances I take. You can tell your clients about me. And honestly, I really only had to do that for a month because then they told each other about me. And it's unfortunate, really, because there is such a need, but I don't really have to do much for marketing because they find out about me and then they tell their friends and they tell their friends. And I get a lot of clients who will say, oh, this person told me, for my assessment practice, I'll assess my way through friend groups because they'll say, hey, there's a reason we all click. Here's who did my evaluation give her a call, and it doesn't, people find me.
Because there are fewer therapists, do you find yourself seeing other types of clients? I imagine in a more rural setting, therapists operate more as generalists just because there's fewer specialists. Is that the case?
Yeah. So there's scope of practice, and that's important. And you do have to have boundaries around that. And also the hard limits of your scope get a little bit more gray when you're in a rural area, because the ethics code says don't see someone you're not trained to see. But if you can't make a referral, you figure it out and you just do it. So that was my pre-doctoral and my postdoctoral training in Arkansas through the National Psychology Training Consortium. Their whole thing is rural mental health. So there was a lot of, I worked under a psychologist in private practice. The next closest clinic to us was 50 miles away. And this was back in 2014 before everybody was doing stuff online. So it was, people would come in with complex presentations. People would come in who had, a kind of like a peripheral, not like, we're not seeing our own family members, but, my supervisor, my employer had kids, and he was the only psychologist in town. So when his kids' classmates needed to be evaluated, he was like, well, either I figure out how to balance this dual relationship, or this child doesn't get the help they need. So you figure it out so that people aren't left hanging.
What is that experience like personally? Because I imagine in a more rural setting, you're more likely to run into clients or run into your own therapist.
That's why I like telehealth very much, honestly, because my North Dakota clients aren't going to bump into me at the grocery store. My Montana clients aren't bumping into me out in public or anything. So I like telehealth. I also like licensure reciprocity, because that brings more people. South Dakota is SIPAC'd now. So any SIPAC psychologist can see someone who's in South Dakota. And that's huge, because when I'm like, I don't know, like, I can't see you for whatever reason, and I don't know who to send you to because there's nobody else. Now I can be like, hey, here's a huge list of people who have now been approved to practice here.
How do you reach clients who live in other states? Because I imagine local marketing, is easier, right?
Sure.
To drive around town and, build your referral network.
Oh, people find you online all the time. I'm on a couple of listings. I don't spend a lot of money on directories, but Neurodivergent therapists, ndtherapists.com, you pay a one-time fee and then you're there, for life. So I just, a lot of people find me there. I don't like they don't exist anymore, but the CareDash websites that just make up a profile for you. I don't like that. But I do like when someone who, and I'm not saying my clients need to do this, but I've had a number of times that someone who had a good experience with me will just list me somewhere. So PDA America, pathological demand avoidance, it's not a recognized diagnosis yet, but basically someone that I did an autism eval for who had PDA traits joined this organization, and they were like, we need to list providers that we know do a good job. And so then they just put me on their website and linked me. And so people were finding me through that. I think it's New York Autism Society or something like that, listed me, and people find me through that all the time. So kind of once you get rolling, I mean, the internet, everybody uses the internet to find stuff. So if you've got the web presence, people will find you.
Exactly. It sounds like having a strong niche or specialization really helps with word of mouth. Could you talk about your niche and the types of clients that you work with?
My specific niche is also really helpful, because the autistic community in particular are going to tell their friends about the things that they like. So if you do a good job with your autistic clients, they're going to tell everybody about you, and they're all going to call you, and they're going to, so it's, it kind of, the snowball starts and then it follows itself. So I don't know if other niches have that same experience, but my autism assessments in particular, it's a lot of, they tell people about me. My blog gets more hits from Reddit than any other social media site, and I don't use Reddit.
Interesting.
It's because other people shared me there so many times that I get hits from this website that I don't even use.
No, I mean, that's a really great point about creating content, writing articles, writing blog posts, putting that on your site that people find and share, and people sharing your stuff with other people without you even being involved, I think is a really great signal.
You share something, and even the people, like for every person who contacts me from that article, it's really good to know that however many people probably read it and benefited from it, but didn't end up needing like my actual services. So that's how I got into writing. Was I had no more availability and people kept calling, and I was like, how do you support more people when there's only so many clinical hours you can do in a week?
Yeah, definitely. And I think you do a really great job of that, both writing for your own blog, but you also write for other sites as well, right?
Yep. Very well I started out with the Uptake, which is a community journalism local paper out of Minneapolis, that they needed a psychologist to do, or I guess wanted a psychologist to do some articles on mental health in 2020 with everything. And then, I ended up doing several pieces for them. And then from that, I was able to get in with Dash Meredith, which is who oversees Very Well. So now I've written for them. I've written, like, they're the parent company of a bunch of things. So I've written for like health.com, parents.com, People Magazine, apparently, which I did not realize was happening. So I did they wanted someone to review several different telehealth options for group therapy. So the brief that I got said group therapy for people. And I was like, what a funny name to give it. Like, of course it's like group therapy for who? Like,
right.
All of our articles are for people,
right?
Yeah. Like, yeah. So I was like, okay, that's a weird title, but I'll do it. And then I got the alert that it was published. I was like, oh, group therapy for people.
That makes sense. Yeah. I want to go back to, starting your practice. Sounds like the experience actually of starting your private practice was pretty smooth.
Yeah.
But looking back, were there any mistakes that you made or anything that you would have done differently knowing what you know now? I
wish I had done it sooner, honestly, because just, if you want to work for a group, if that's what works for you in your life, that's awesome. Everybody needs to do what they need to do. But the big thing is, like, with the group, you work and you generate revenue, and then the group gets a cut of what you bring in. And it's kind of you got to ask yourself, what value am I getting from sacrificing this % of my income? And really, the main thing it became was that they had an admin who answered the phone for me. They helped me out with billing, and they gave me an office space. And, starting in 2020, they really weren't giving me an office space anymore. And by, any group practice owners listening, if you had your employees switch to working from home and you didn't give them a pay bump for using their house as an office and saving you money on office space, like, you should be giving them a bump for that, because that's a reduction in the value that you're providing your employees. But the Mindful Admins does part-time admins, and you just pay by the hour for what you need from them. And they're fantastic. And actually, I've been dealing with some medical stuff lately, and the admin that I had through them has been fantastic. Her name is Dane, and I love her. And I I had to last minute cancel some people last week because I was at a follow-up appointment and my doctor was like, hey, you can't leave. We have to do this right now. So I called her and I was like, I can't work today. And she just took care of it. So that's been awesome. I mean, depending on your setup, not everybody uses an admin. It just reached the point that with the volume of inquiries I was getting, it was taking up too much of my day to be calling people back and answering emails and answering messages and answering just everything. It was too much of my time. So I did hire her to do, or partner with them. I guess technically they employ her and I just pay an invoice every month. I think I should have done that sooner as well. Like I was hesitant because I was like, oh, but then you have to pay them. And I'm like, okay, but what's the value of that time that I'm getting back, basically?
Yeah. We've talked about that idea on this show a lot, that it can feel expensive to hire an accounting firm like Herd, right? Or hire an admin. But when you think about the time that you're spending and what your time is worth, and not even just your time, but also your energy, if you're exhausted from going back and forth on email or, doing billing, the fact that you are able to outsource that, get your time and energy back to reinvest in your business or not is
or in yourself,
completely
like
worth
just
it.
have the time. Yeah.
Yeah. You have mentioned this. You also do assessments and evaluations. Would love to dig into how you got into that. Maybe we just start there. How did you start offering assessments?
That's kind of always been something I've been doing like the whole time. It depending on where you are, scopes of practice and training and everything. Oftentimes it has to be a psychologist doing the assessments, but that was a big part of my training. And, a lot of my supervisors coming through grad school said, this is kind of the main thing that you can do as a psychologist that you couldn't do with another degree as a therapist. So why are you spending an extra 3 years in training, and why are you spending this much money? Well, really, it's because you're getting this extra training in the assessment specifically. So, why not do that? So, and my internship and my postdoc were very assessment heavy. So I just kind of kept doing that.
And what kind of assessments or evaluations do you offer?
So primarily, the majority of the assessments I do are ADHD and autism. Initially, I was kids and adolescents, but not a lot of people do that for adults. So I really quickly again, rural mental health. Adults were calling and saying, I can't find anyone who does this. Is there any chance? So I did more training and I got some consultation and I figured it out basically. And so now I do it a lot for adults because a lot of us, we're still not great at identifying either in kids, but a lot of us grew up in the 80s and 90s and early 2000s when we were even worse about identifying any of that. And so we've got people realizing now and wanting, support, going back to school, needing accommodations, et cetera. So kind of fell into that. I do some others as well. There's in South Dakota, there's some disability services that you have to have certain psych assessments on file in order to receive the services. So I do those evaluations for the state. I do assessments, for the VA. I do some like eligibility for disability services, basically, and then just whatever people call about. If I'm like, yeah, that seems doable to me. Once in a while, I'll do something for like an IEP, but often the school wants their psychologist doing it. So I'll do those for when the school has refused to do the testing, but said we'll accept an external report. Then the parents call me.
Have you seen an increase in demand for assessment services, specifically around ADHD, from people talking more about ADHD on social media? I know there's people who are like self-diagnosing themselves on TikTok. Has that impacted your practice?
Well, for my practice, I noticed the uptick in 2020. And what I have attributed that to, and I don't know how much this has been actually researched, but what I noticed was a lot of people went home and stress level went up and they realized that they were basically at their limit with masking and they finally couldn't do it anymore. So that was kind of the trigger for, okay, something is not right here. What do I need to change? And so that's when they started reaching out. There's a lot of nuance. So for when it comes to like self-identifying, self-diagnosing, accuracy is not 100%, but it is pretty high. And especially for autism, there's a study that came out in February that found that, first of all, the RADS-R, which you can take for free on Embrace Autism, that they were finding that people who scored above that cutoff score were almost always autistic based on more testing. So, and evaluations are expensive and it's hard to find a provider who is competent to work with adults, and you can pay for a whole assessment and still the evaluator can get it wrong. That happened to me. I had to be evaluated twice because they got stuff wrong in the first one. So, I can see why someone might not have the option to get like officially diagnosed. I've heard stories of people in custody battles and their ex will talk to the judge and say, they're autistic and I'm not, therefore I'm the more fit parent. And then the judge awards custody. There's states that put you on a list if autism is in your official medical record. New Hampshire got rid of theirs, but there are still, I think, 7 states that still require you to be put on a government list if you're autistic, which is ridiculous. And there are countries you can't immigrate to if autism's in your medical record. So some people understandably are like, these traits resonate. I do all these things. I feel all these things. I experience all these things. I'm not going to go pay $3,000 for someone to maybe accurately perceive me. And now hey, now I've lost my kids, or now I'm on a government list, or my visa's been revoked because I wanted to have it be official. So, but on the other hand, if you don't have the official diagnosis, you can't use it to request an accommodation, get support at school, get support in your workplace, apply for disability benefits. So really, self-identifying doesn't take anything away because you can't access any of the very, very limited services unless it's actually in your medical record. And there's lots of reasons why people don't want it in their medical records. So that's why I support that. But I see a lot of people who, especially with the push to go back to the office, who said, I came home and I unmasked and I realized how miserable I was at the office and how much that was hurting me. I would like the accommodation to keep working from home, and you can't get that unless you have it, in your record. So
that's a great point. You mentioned that testing is expensive.
Yes.
You threw out a number there, $3,000. Are you able to share what you charge for testing versus therapy?
Varies a little bit. What I do, and this actually it depends on where you are, because I'm also a registered psychologist in New Zealand, and the organization I work with through New Zealand and helped with the founding and funding and all that. This is how much it costs. And it's just like a set. And then we do sliding scale for low income. But in the US, I just have an hourly rate. And so if the report writing takes me 2 hours, I charge you for 2 hours. If it takes me 3 hours, I charge you for 3 hours. Mine usually end up in about the $900 to $1,200 range. And actually, I was able to recently lower it a little bit because one of the insurance companies that had been giving me just issue after issue and forcing me to call and spend hours on the phone arguing about why they should pay for the service. In theory, what they're supposed to do for their customer who gives them money. And I finally said, I'm not dealing with you anymore. And I decredentialed, and that freed up several hours a week of my time. Because when it comes to authorization, that's not something I can outsource to my admin. I have to do that because they need me to defend why the services were necessary. So I, as the provider, have to do that. And it freed up so much in my time that I lowered my cash rates.
So are you able to take insurance then for testing?
Yes. So I can bill out of network. Not everybody has out of network benefits, but I take a couple of insurances that are local in South Dakota. There's 2 hospital systems in Sioux Falls, Sanford and Avera. Actually, I was at an event and Sanford gave me a branded water bottle. But I'm not plugging them. It's just it's a big water bottle, so I like it. But each of those systems has an insurance company. So I accept both of those insurances. I don't know if it's because they're small, but they just don't give me a lot of trouble. They don't require prior authorization. They don't make me call and call and call to get paid. I've just generally had good experiences with them. And then I'm a Medicare provider, and then I take South Dakota Medicaid. And I would take more Medicaids, but they won't let me.
You said that you're also licensed in New Zealand.
Yes.
Which is interesting.
Yes.
How did that happen?
So I had my honeymoon there in 2019, and we loved it. We went to Australia and New Zealand, and we loved it. We loved New Zealand. We loved Auckland in particular. And we both had job offers in Auckland in March of 2020. And yeah, they were originally locked down for 3 weeks. So they said, send your stuff, apply for everything. And then in 3 weeks, when we come back, we'll process it. So I applied, and I'd applied to be registered. And then it was not 3 weeks. It was much longer than that. And then I had to let go of the job offer because I couldn't get my registration approved. I couldn't get a visa to be allowed to work over there. So my husband and I had to let those jobs go. And then like a year later, I got an email that said, "Hey, we've approved your registration. You can practice here now." So well, and I was supposed to go back, but then my doctor told me not to fly because of my medical stuff. But the day that everything IT went down was when I was supposed to fly out, and that flight got canceled. So every time I try to go back to New Zealand, there is a worldwide event that like shuts down all the travel. So I think I should just work remotely.
Yeah, it sounds like it.
Yeah.
Going back to testing, I just have one more question there. Then I'd love to move on. How do you think about the balance between testing and therapy in your own practice, and what is that split?
Sure.
Like?
So I have leaned more on testing just because there are fewer people who can do testing, and it's easier to find people to refer to for therapy. So, because there are more therapists, more different licensures that can do therapy, there's just less of a shortage basically, versus like testing, there's fewer people that I can refer to.
Are you interested in growing your practice into a group practice? Have you been approached by other, therapists, interns, people seeking supervision?
I have been, but I don't really want to add supervision to the things that I'm doing. And I do that with Change for Better. So like I do some supervision and some oversight, like I'm the clinical director. So I'm not really interested in doing that for my own practice. So
that makes sense. I want to jump to training. So you also offer training through Pessi. How did you get into that?
So with continuing education, I when everything locked down, I noticed that a lot of the therapists that I network with, a lot of my colleagues who work with kids were having a really hard time doing telehealth with their child clients. And I don't want to say the transition was easy, but I was finding all kinds of stuff that seemed to work really well. So, and I was looking for like, what education do I need to be offering this service? And I wasn't really finding a whole lot. There was a little bit. I took a course with Leanna Lowenstein. I think it was through the Learning Edge or something like that, that she does telehealth with kids. And that was a really great course, really helpful. But I was looking and I noticed that Pessi didn't have anything for telehealth with kids, but not to flood them or inundate them, but they will accept a pitch from anybody. You fill out the form on their website and they will, I'm not saying that they'll automatically platform you, but they're like we're always looking for speakers, fill out the form. So I did, and they said, "You're right. We don't have anything for telehealth with kids. Let's do that." So that kind of got me in the door. They're very thorough and it's kind of slow moving. So I got a little bit frustrated with some of the things that I wanted to do because I was like, I want an ADHD brain. I want to do this. I want to do this today. And they're like, all right, we'll get back to you in 9 months. Yeah. Like I'm doing something on supporting autistic adults who are experiencing burnout. And they're like, yes, we're scheduling December. And I'm like, what do you mean you're scheduling December? Like, and I get that. Like they're doing a lot of stuff. They book things out, but I was like, I want to go, I want to do this. So I've done with some other organizations as well who want people who have that experience, like who have you taught with before? And I said, I've taught with Pessi. So I got in that way, and I've taught with Spring Health, the Telehealth Certification Institute, a couple others. I have to go back and look at my resume. But what I found was that you can just make CE courses as long as you have the approval from the governing body. So I just went to APA and I said, how do you decide? And they said that they don't approve courses, they approve organizations. And anybody can apply to be a sponsor for continuing education through the American Psychological Association. So I just did that, which I didn't just do that. It was a Oh my God, the process.
Right.
But I got it approved. So now I can create, and then I have not employees, but I have like partners, other psychologists who review anytime I create a course. They oversee and they make sure that it's up to the standards. And then actually I've got a coming up soon. I just sent to APA. Here's what I created. Here's what I've been doing. Here's how many people have taken each of my courses. And then I can go on my own timeline because I just make it.
Yeah, I love that you saw this opportunity. No one was really creating continuing education around telehealth for kids, so that you just became that person. And now I imagine you've developed, thought leadership and expertise around this topic. And I'm sure you're invited to speak about it and talk about it and write about it.
I've got 2 books on telehealth with kids. And then I've done a whole bunch of other talks on other things related to telehealth. I've done like telehealth and psychological assessments, accurate diagnostics in telehealth. That was the Telehealth Certification Institute. I've done a few telehealth talks with Spring Health. And then in my own practice, I've got, under my own sponsorship, I've got a general telehealth for therapists, telehealth techniques for children, telehealth and safety concerns. And then I think I have to look at my list again. But then I also with my own was that I wanted to do more on like the neurodiversity affirming mental health care. So I've made a few of those as well, mostly focused on ADHD and autism. Just because that's both my training and my lived experience. Neurodivergence is everybody who's not under the neurotypical umbrella. And that includes, psychotic disorders, mood disorders, other neurological conditions like epilepsy, traumatic brain injury. It's a pretty big range. And, I can't be an expert on all of it. So I speak about like this is relevant to a lot of people. And my knowledge is mostly ADHD and autism. So I have that focus, but also that this isn't just this group. It's a lot of people.
Right. As someone who is autistic and has ADHD, how does that impact you as a business owner, and what are some of the things that you do to help manage that?
Yeah, I do have to keep an eye on my own burnout stuff because I don't really have a brake pedal. I just kind of have the gas pedal. So it is hard to slow down, and it is hard to say no to opportunities. So I try to have boundaries around that. I am pretty firm about I don't take like people will be like, oh, can we do just a quick 15-minute call? I just want to pick your brain. And I'm like, all right, for $200, I will do that. First of all, that's good because I have bills. But second of all, it shuts down like a lot of the, oh, don't you just want, let's just talk. No.
Right. I was going to ask that question as well. Something we've talked about at length. I posted about it recently, on Twitter and LinkedIn today, actually, that as helping professionals, people have this expectation, I think, of therapists that they'll do free labor. And so for folks, who are listening, who get asked to do free labor, what would your advice be for them? And kind of what is your typical response?
One of the people I want to help is me, and she lives in my house. And she insists on eating every single day. So I want to help people, but my unpaid work time goes to, I do a certain amount of pro bono clinical work. And that right now is focused in New Zealand with a Change for Better. And our hope is to grow that organization to be international. But basically, I ran the numbers, and it was a little bit ago that I ran the numbers. So this is not going to be accurate as of today. But earlier this year, I calculated that I had done the equivalent of $40,000 of clinical work. Like this is what the going rate for this would be, that I was able to provide at just doing psychological assessments, and people would pay for essentially the overhead so that I wasn't losing money on those assessments. And there were a few, honestly, that we went into the red for to be able to make it work for people. So when your $10 million app valued at 10 million or even 100 million. I had a company that was valuated at over $1 billion reach out and want to pick my brain for free because don't you want to help people? I do want to help people. And the people who I help who don't pay me are the clients who can't afford to pay the going rate for an assessment, who can't afford to pay my rate for an assessment, which is lower than the going rate because I do try to be accessible. So, how I can afford to do $40,000 of pro bono work, because when the $100 million app wants to pick my brain, they're going to pay me. And that money subsidizes my ability to help people who actually can't afford to pay me. Because if your app is valued at $100 million, you could pay my rate. You're choosing not to. And
right.
Honestly, I tell them that. when they're like, don't you want to help people? This is just a quick call. I will Google the name of the company. And if the information is public, I'll be like, here's how much funding you pulled. You can pay me for my time. You can afford to, because here's how much funding you have. And I'll just be an asshole about it. I don't know if I'm allowed to say asshole in here, but
definitely. Yeah.
And I put it on my website. I'm like, here's what my rate is. By contacting me, you indicate that you understand that rate. It doesn't eliminate the people demanding my unpaid time, but it does reduce it significantly. Also, this is maybe, I'm not saying you have to do this. This might be too snarky for some people, but my website now lists a haggle fee. So if you contact me and you don't immediately agree to my rate goes up because you have made me haggle with you. And yeah. I've never had someone pay the haggle fee. It's really more just to show you, like, no, I said this is my boundary. We're not doing it. So
yeah, I love that.
Yeah, I had that. Someone reached out recently about something and they're like, how much would this be? And I wrote back, based on what you're describing, that would be $500 for that consultation. And they said, we don't have $500. We have $150. Can you please do it for $150? And I wrote back, per my website, these rates are non-negotiable. The rate is now $550.
I love that. Yeah. I imagine also that there are companies who are willing to pay, and
absolutely.
That initial request for, to pick your brain could turn into a consulting opportunity. Have you consulted with these types of companies as well?
Oh, yeah. So I have actually. So I don't know if you, this is a fidget. It's magnets, and it's really cool. And these guys emailed me randomly and said, we need to consult someone about a new product that we're putting together. And I wrote back and I was like, I assume you saw my rate on my website. And they said, yes, of course. What email address can we PayPal that to you? And we had a great talk. And they had a question about a study that they're putting together. And I said, I'm not a researcher, but I have a friend who is. I put them in touch with her. And, I got free magnets. But I did a blog post about the magnets, and, they got I hope they feel like they got value out of that. I mean, I'm still talking about them, but they were like, of course we're going to pay you for your time. Like that's not even a question. And, now they get plugged all the time because I love those things and I just use them, just at my desk. I'll be, and, I'll have, I had a contact from, this company called Grace, Grayce. But they're often an employment benefit. I think I don't want to misspeak on what they do, but what I help them with, psychologist tips on their social media. They do question and answer. We did one that was if you have a child and you suspect they may be neurodivergent, what next steps, ask a psychologist what next steps you want to do, stuff like that. So they get that resource that they get to have as part of what they're able to offer. And then they compensate me fairly for my time.
I can understand why therapists do feel some guilt around, saying no, because inherently most therapists do want to help people. But I think what I'm hearing you say is that if you don't have those boundaries and you say yes to those types of requests, one, it just puts you at risk of burnout because you're just taking on more.
Definitely.
Labor. But it's also, we've talked about this on the show as well. It's like, if you're taking on these unpaid opportunities, they really can be distractions from, opportunities that could be paid or could be work that you actually
want to be doing because you only have so much time in the day.
Yeah. Well, and you only have so much money to run your business. And if I didn't have such firm boundaries around tech companies that are worth enough money that they could pay me if they wanted to, I wouldn't be able to do the low cost ADHD and autism evaluations. I wouldn't financially be able to afford to cut my clients the breaks that I've been able to cut them. And especially my low income clients who are struggling to make ends meet and need this diagnosis to get the support that they need in order to thrive in their lives are more important than $100 million app. The $100 million app can subsidize the client, not the other way around.
That makes sense. As you think about your practice and your business today with, all of these things that you're doing, what are some of the challenges that you're facing and how are you thinking about them?
Sure. I mean, well, right now I'm trying to medically recover so that I can be back at 100% for work. So that's kind of the main one. It is hard because I want to be able to see everybody. And, I also can't, there aren't enough hours in the day. So having solid people to refer to when it's like, I can't do this, but here's somebody that I know will do it well, basically, is a bit of a challenge. And then I guess as I'm with the continuing education, APA has a lot of fees around that. So I would love to, because I know that a lot of us are not paid what we're worth. So I would love to be able to create some continuing ed that's just free for people. Like you can just have your CEs, but I've got to make back what I put into it before I can do that.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like getting approved for Medicare in other states also.
Oh, that would be nice. Yeah. Although, Medicaid in other states, honestly, that's a bit of a sliding scale thing as well, because Medicaid does not reimburse at a sustainable rate. That's a whole other problem, but that's something I want to do because again, I want to be accessible and I want to be able, someone who has Medicaid, I want to be able to say, yes, you can get the service you need because I accept the way that I can accept the payer who oversees and makes sure, you can't find someone who takes your payer. I want to be able to take that payer. So I have a much higher threshold of tolerance for Medicaid than I do for the private insurance companies, just because those are the people who just simply, I can't do a payment plan. I can't save up. I can't whatever. I can't get this service unless you can take Medicaid. So it's an accessibility thing. And, you can't bill Medicaid out of network, but you can bill the other insurances out of network a lot of the time. So that's accessibility. I want people to get the services they need.
I said Medicare, they're not Medicaid. Oh, yeah. So that was my
Medicare
mistake.
Is different. Medicare is a federal program. So technically I can take Medicare from most states. There are a couple of plans that get a little bit, there's one in New York that's basically it's Medicare, but it's through Medicaid. So I can't take it because I'm not in New York. But I've seen Medicare clients in other states. It just, well, and that they also don't reimburse at a sustainable rate. So I can, again, I consult with tech companies and I charge them a consultation fee, and then I can afford to take more Medicare clients because I'm taking the hit on what I'll get for this assessment, but I have other revenue streams.
We're coming to the end of our conversation. Would love to wrap this up with a final question. What's one thing that you want therapists who are listening to take away from this? I know that we've talked about a lot of different topics, but if there's just one takeaway.
I mean, I'd say that, charging for your time, don't take those free consultations. When I respond to those, I get a little, I don't know if mean is the right word, but my goal when someone is like, how dare you not work for free? My goal is to give them a response that they will be embarrassed to say that to somebody else. If you're having trouble saying no for yourself, say no for the rest of us, because every time somebody says yes to that request, it reinforces that that's an okay thing to ask somebody, and it's not. So if we all said, why would you ask somebody that? Eventually, I would like them to be shamed into not making those requests anymore.
Thank you, Dr. Amy, so much for coming on. For folks who want to connect with you, where can they find you?
Well, Resiliency Mental Health is my blog, and that kind of connects to everything else. I'm on Twitter and Blue Sky as Dr. Amy Saidi. I'm on Mastodon, Dr. Amy Saidi, ohio.social. And then I'm Facebook, Dr. Amy Marschall. I am not on LinkedIn because LinkedIn sucks.
Great. Well, we'll post those links in the show notes. We won't put LinkedIn on there.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much again for coming on. This has been great.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Herd Business School, brought to you by Herd, the financial back office for therapists. Visit the Herd Resource Hub at joinherd.com to support you in your journey as a private practice owner. And don't forget to subscribe on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. We'll see you in the next class.